Welcome to the Default Profitable Podcast. And this week, we're going to talk about how to sell a business, not how to buy it, not how to grow it, not how to create it. We're doing something a little bit different. I'm your host, Matt Nettleton, and today for episode 2 of How to Buy and Sell a Business is Jeff Farren. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Happy to be here.
All right. So I know you introduced yourself in the last episode, so why don't we just kind of run through that for people that didn't listen and just give us the quick highlights of how Jeff Farren ended up in this position.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. So I had a long career as a business owner, started advising businesses as a fractional CFO in, 10 or 15 years ago. I now call my practice Value Growth Advisory. Yes, still CFO, but focus on helping companies position to sell. And I also am a business broker and represent them on the sale as well.
All right. So we talked before about how to buy and some of the things that came up, but let's start with probably what I think is the most amusing question about the whole process, which is how far in advance should an owner start preparing exit strategies and planning to sell their business?
I think it's similar to when's the best time to plant a tree,
Yeah.
right? The best time was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Businesses that are started with the end in mind and designed from the very first day, that's a best practice. That's a great thing to do. Let's assume you didn't do that though, and you've been running the business for a while, and you're getting near the time to sell. The ideal time to prepare in that context would be 3 to 5 years, and there are a couple of reasons why that's the case. For one thing, on the financial side, there's going to be about a 3 to 5 year look back on your finances. So they need to be clean. They need to be, excellent results. And if you're, the objective of, let's say, lowering your operating expenses or improving cash flow, if you can make those things hit your tax return and your P&L on a trend from 3 to 5 years in advance, that's going to really give you a leg up on due diligence. But it also provides enough time to make some other operating improvements, structural improvements, or changes, maybe improvements, yes, but some changes to allow the business to be more transferable.
So, again, 130 episodes of this, and when I ask people, what should you have when you start the business, everybody says, well, you should have a good plan, and you should have savings, and you should, and then you should have a knowledge of the market that you want to sell into. And then my follow-up question is always, okay, if you got those 3 things, how many did you have when you started the business? And typically they say, well, I didn't have any savings and my plan was terrible. And I didn't really understand what it was I was going to sell because I thought I was going to do this and people wanted to pay me for that. And so I had to change direction. But I think there's really a fourth thing, which is if you were going to buy a business like the one you want to start, what information would you want the seller to be able to give you? And you should start building that portfolio of data from day one. That fair?
Absolutely. Sometimes I call that advanced due diligence, knowing what the questions are going to be, how to sail through diligence and build that from the beginning. And oh, by the way, those are the elements of building a stable, healthy company anyway, like
right.
Having documented processes, right? Having stuff not in your head, but in a library, in a useful asset resource that you can train on and follow.
Right. So I guess there's really 3 buckets that people need to think about preparing as business owners, right? So you're going to have an operational bucket where everything that happens inside the business is documented, right? Mm-hmm. I refer to this with my clients. I say it's the water buffalo problem, right? If you get hit by a water buffalo on the way to work and the business shuts down because you're not there, then you don't actually have a business. You just have a job you can't quit. The second piece, they've got to have they got to have their financial house in order. They got to have returns. They got to have P&Ls. They got to have statements. They got to have, I got to be able to give somebody a Dropbox folder filled with financial data that proves that I'm not just making it up.
Mhm.
And then the third thing, and this is something that obviously near and dear to my heart, is they have to have a documented sales process so that revenue is predictable.
Agreed.
And if they have those three things, early on, they'll be fine. But like you said, the best time is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. As an owner, they should be able to document that stuff, right?
Yes, they absolutely should.
Now, I think so. I've had in the last since 2018, I've had 16 businesses that have been clients of mine sell, and there's been a wide variety of outcomes. Um, but the worst outcomes have been business owners who were not psychologically prepared that they would not be owning the business after they sold it.
Yeah.
So tell me, how do you help people understand what it's going to be like when the business that they've created, their baby, is gone?
Yeah. I I think the first is well, they're all related, but having a clear vision of what you want to do after the business is sold, right? Having goals, having a purpose, whether they're hobbies, whether it's your bucket list item, but a really clear idea of what you would do if you didn't go to work every day. Um, and it's related to things like what is your legacy versus the legacy of your business, and disconnecting the two. You are not your business. You created this business, or you've owned this business for a long time, and it's an important thing in the marketplace, but it's not you. And so building the business so it can sustain its legacy and be passed on to someone else, and separating your own legacy and your own life and what you want to accomplish with the rest of it from the business is really, really key. Um, so I think related to that also is, there's when the transition starts to occur, um, there's a kind of a reframing of the transition, right? So, is the owner losing something, or are they embarking on a new adventure, right? And so you've got to kind of mentally think about things differently. Hey, I'm not. It's not something I'm losing. It's not. It's something I'm gaining, right? And it's opportunity for me personally. That's a little touchy feely, but it's real when you hear someone, "Well, I want to die at the desk." What they're really saying is they don't know what else they would do with their life if they weren't, building widgets. And I'll tell you a quick story. In the last episode, you asked me about my entrepreneurial journey, and I mentioned I bought a business when I was 29. It happened to be it was a marina. It was a vacation destination marina in Kentucky, and the seller was terminally ill. And he passed about, I think it was about 2 or 3 months after we bought the business. So I went to his funeral, and he's a nice man, but it was a small town, and everyone like, there were like 7 eulogies at this man's funeral, and they all talked about the marina. And I left feeling a little bit sad. I'm like, if what I do is mentioned in every eulogy at my funeral, I wouldn't be very happy, that with my life. And it's nothing against him, but it's just that, it hit me right in the face. What is your legacy? And I don't want it to be what I do for a living. I want it to be other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's we teach IR theory, which is the idea that what you do is not who you are. Like, you have value regardless of what you do.
Yeah.
And even if you have a terrible day, like I use the example, I've been in a bowling league for 14 years. I COVID knocked me out of the bowling league. They moved lanes. I don't bowl anymore. But even when I was a bowler, if I would have a bad day bowling, it didn't make me a less worthwhile human. If
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
bad day in a sales call, it's all of a sudden my kids don't go, "Well, you're a terrible dad too." I mean, you've got all these
Yeah.
different roles that you have to do. On the other hand, you've got on this other side of the ledger, you've got you as a human, and you as a human are still valuable whether or not, you actually kill it at work.
Yeah.
So,
Agreed.
all right. So, documentation and record keeping, financial planning. Tell me about some of the different approaches that people use and that have different values. So, what are some different ways you can do it? And then what are some different ways that are valuable?
Uh, well, I mean, if you're talking about, like, let's say financial record keeping, right?
Yes.
Having them it starts with timely and accurate as you're creating your financials, and then it's establishing a filing system where it can easily be shared in a consistent format with the next owner. Um, the Some of the and I, you would you I'd love to hear your ideas about sales processes, but when I think about operating processes, there are a number of different, like, I'm not a big one for written SOPs. I think they tend to collect dust on a shelf somewhere. I like screen capture, videos that can be very quickly done even while someone's doing a task, and then I like the technique of sharing that task with someone else who's going to you're going to be training to do that task, and then that person becomes responsible for improving it and updating it, and so it becomes a living document. It's got to live somewhere. It's got to be stored somewhere. But basically, it's something that's part of everyone's role of refining their how to and training others on how to do it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've had experience with is ISO 9000. I'm sure you've dealt with ISO 9000. And, and I finally had a guy who looked at me and said, listen, ISO's nice, but if we wrote a procedure to make cement life preservers, as long as we followed the steps, nobody would care if we all drowned. Right. So I think sometimes people get carried away with the idea of, oh, it's in writing. That must mean it's good. And they forget why they're putting it in writing to begin with.
Yeah, and there's something permanent about the writing. A word processor can change as easily as you can change a video, but the point, I mean, our business changes every single day. It's an organism that's and it should, right? We should be improving the process, right?
Yes.
And so, um, I think it starts with with that observation and that mindset that, look, you're going to be training your replacement. You're going to be refining this process and making it better. When you do, capture it in some quick and efficient way and share it with others.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and one of the other things about it, and you mentioned sales process. When I talk to my clients about sales process, scripts don't work, and you can't say everybody has to do it exactly this way. But you got to give people like, hey, here are some gates you got to go through. Like everybody's going to get through the gates a little bit different, but this has to happen before that. That has happened before this. I mean, there's just a series of events that have to occur. So if you can just document the big picture stuff, you'll probably be fine. And in my experience, if a sales process takes up more than a single sheet of paper, it's never going to get used. So
yeah, that makes sense.
now, more important than sales process is sales concentration. So we talked about this before. My belief is if you have a single client who's more than 10% of your annual revenue, that client owns your business. Tell me how you look at when you meet with a seller, how do you look at sales concentration from the seller side? And what do you help them with?
Well, um, uh, uh, first, it's the mindset that, a few large customers are a risk. Some people don't understand that. They think, hey, I've got a large government contract as an example, and that's the strength of my business. Well, it's really not. It's a huge risk, and it can, if a business presents to me with, hey, I've got 7 clients. Well, we need more, and we need we try to sell, whether it's one thing or several things, to lots and lots of people, so that n- you're well under 10% is not a bad place. I mean, clearly um, it's harder for early stage companies to get there, but established companies for sure need to have a 10% as a upper limit to their concentration. More is certainly better when it comes to number of customers.
I had a cleaning supply company that had a single client that was 40% of the revenue. They got asked to do a reverse Dutch auction to take over the rest of the country. They were servicing one-fifth of the country for this large. And are you familiar with the reverse Dutch auction?
Uh, I've heard of it, but refresh my memory on that.
So their client came to them and said, "Could you put together an operations manual? And we're gonna put it out on the internet, and we're gonna give everybody 30 days to bid the price down." So everybody goes in and you make an offer of, "I'll do this work for this much per location per hour." And then the next person comes in and says, "I'll do the same work per location per hour for 1 penny less." And then the next guy comes in and they're a nickel less.
Stop,
And
please. It sounds horrible.
so the guy that has the business has to give everybody the operating manual to bid against them.
Ugh.
Right? So this guy came to me and he said, "Hey, listen, they told me I'm going to get the business. They love me. They want me to put the operations manual together. This will, in one fell swoop, 300% my business. I'll be 3 times the size that I am today in 90 days." I said, "You're not going to get the business and you're going to lose 40% of your revenue. Are you prepared for that?" And he laughed at me. He said, "They wouldn't have asked me to do this if they didn't want to hire me." And needless to say, he didn't get the business. He did lose his business. I mean, it was 90 days and he was gone. But I just, I just, anytime it's above 10%, I'm terrified.
Well, and I didn't give you a very good answer for that before, because obviously more is better. But let's kind of rewind a little bit about are all customers created equal? And they're not. And so I start with advising companies to analyze their customers and determine which which, which of them align with their ideal customer profile, right? And first you got to define what that looks like, what business you're in, what business you want to be in, who best fits that. Because some customers, are companies, when they especially when they start, they take on anybody and everybody,
Right.
and then then they're enticed to, hey, this I can triple my business if I take on this customer, but it's bad business, so why would you want to do that? But they do it anyway, and so you end up with this hodgepodge of a customer role that many don't fit your ideal. And so sometimes that ideal could be, anytime you're eliminating someone that's not ideal, you're freeing up capacity to bring on someone that is ideal. So you've got to be acquiring more to backfill the ones that you're getting rid of. But over time, what you should be doing, not just from a concentration standpoint, which is a big part of it, but also who who is in the right location, buys the right product, interacts with you in the way you want to be interacted with, pays their bills on time, all the things that make up a good customer. They're checking every box, and you're not spending your energy on customers that, you know, let's say they pay slow and they're rude to your employees. But boy, they
It's a
it's a
big
lot of
check. It's a big check.
it's hard to part ways, but you know what? Over time, develop a plan to do that. And sometimes it's just price increases that aren't across the board, but always with the idea of, who do I want to serve? How do I want to serve them? And I'm going to do more of that and less of things that don't fit. And oh, by the way, I don't want to be overly concentrated to anybody.
So a recent search that I did in an online database pointed out that there were roughly, now I don't know if this is an accurate number, but there were roughly 24,000 EINs in the 317 area code with 2.5 to $50 million of revenue, which was a crazy high number to me. But of those businesses, a ton are owned by people who are 65, 70-year-old plus and getting ready to sell. So how does a seller find a buyer in a crowded marketplace when they're, a smaller business? How do they set themselves apart so that people know that they're ready to move on?
Well, you're asking a business broker, and I'm going to say you
Well,
need
never
to.
ask a barber if you need a haircut. I get that.
But I mean, um, it starts with having a strong business that is saleable, and that's all the fundamentals that we've kind of talked through before. You got to have an excellent customer base. You've got to have a good product. You've got to have solid financials. You've got to have good employees. You got to have good processes. Um, but let's say you have all of that and you're well positioned. If only people knew I was here,
Right.
okay? Then it's finding the right advisor. It's Jeff Farren, Farren at. But find the right advisor who will expose the opportunity to the marketplace. And um, a good M&A firm such as Indiana Business Advisors is well versed in how to do that. Um, and then it's telling the story that you've created, that this is why we're a strong and stable business with an excellent customer base and good processes and excellent financials and deep management team that can sustain itself beyond the energy and the time of the existing owner.
And the other thing about that is the person that you're selling to can buy for a lot of reasons that you as the seller may not understand, right? There are people that will buy a business that they're outside the industry that you're in, and you can't figure out why they would want to join. But it
Yeah.
as a seller, it's more important that you're realistic about what your business is worth and you let people buy for their reasons. You just have to run a clean operation that other people can look at and understand.
That's absolutely correct. So kind of the top of the food chain there are strategic buyers who buy for their own reasons entirely.
Yeah.
Because your business fits into their business in a unique way. They can do something with your business or your product that no one else can do. And therefore, um, your business is unique in value to them. And it's going to be a different value to that strategic buyer than it would be to two or three other strategic buyers. And strategics always pay the most money. It's sort of the holy grail for the business owners to find their strategic.
Right.
The next level down are financial buyers who, are going to be limited by what they can finance the business for with the bank and the return that they would give to the equity investors who are going to provide capital that isn't provided by the bank, and it's all a financial number, and from return and interest rate and coverage and um, so those values it's probably the biggest area are financial buyers, and it's a different price strata than the strategic will pay, but there are only so many strategics out there, and there aren't a lot of strategics in the Main Street business there
And
space.
and one of the things that it's kind of a compounding and self-fulfilling prophecy is if you don't have good documentation on your financials and you don't have good operational procedures and you don't have a clear sales process that the owner's not involved in, you're not going to get a strategic buyer. You're going to get a financial buyer. And the financial buyer is going to nail you to the wall because nobody else is going to give you money for your business.
Yeah, I would. I don't entirely agree with that point. I don't think financial buyers nail the sellers
What
to the wall, but they pay based upon different math,
Right. They're
and the
gonna be
math.
very specific and unemotional about because no, every business owner believes they have the best business. They have the cutest baby. This is why you should pay extra.
Matt, I I just had a conversation last week with a buyer who approached me about a business that um, they would be a good operator for, and it is a great business. They've got 10 years of very stable operations, and they do have an excellent brand in the marketplace, excellent. But the seller wants 5 times what the cash flow can pay. And there's no way to finance it. There's no way to get an investor to do it. It clearly doesn't fit as a financial buyer. And the seller says, I want to be paid for my brand. Well, the answer to the financial buyer is the value of that brand is showing up in your financials for the last 10 years. Yes, it's a good value, and here it is. No, no more, no less. And we're going to apply a multiple to this set of cash flows. If there's a financial buyer who sees that brand in a different way, can do things, then maybe they're out there. It's very possible. But unfortunately, buyers get wrapped up in, I'm going to find her strategic. And they're a little bit like white whales. I mean, most businesses are not purchased by strategics, and they don't get multiples that don't make sense from a financial standpoint. Only to that strategic do they make sense.
Right.
But also, well, someone posted recently as an M&A attorney, had a really clever post about the Family Dollar it was Dollar Tree has announced the sale of Family Dollar for $1 billion. They bought it for $9 billion. So from the time they purchased the business for $9 billion, they've lost $8 billion of value. So all their assumptions about growth, their assumptions about strategic fit, everything. It was probably, this person's point was, it was ego. It was fueled by ego and a desire to get a deal done, and it would never made any sense. But whatever, that's a big, it's a big loss, right? I mean, that's way to be wrong about something. So yeah,
There are
not all strategic acquisitions work out.
Yeah, there are buyers that will overpay for their reasons, but the reality is, unless a business is prepared to look at the numbers cold-hearted, if this was somebody else's business, what would I value it at? They're never gonna be happy.
No.
So, all right. Well, hey, listen, we've been at this now for almost 30 minutes on sellers. What's if you could summarize in one sentence, what your simplest advice for somebody preparing to sell their business would be, other than call Jeff, right? You're not allowed to say call you, but
Okay.
what what's the thing that makes a seller successful?
Prepare to transfer a valuable asset to another party. Make that asset as valuable as possible. And they can do that by the things we talked about today. But think in terms of, I want this asset to be of great value to the next person who can get excited about it, who can execute it in a low risk way and have a great result for the buyer.
Yeah, that is that's probably about as good as you can do for a summary. All right. Hey, this has been another episode of the Default Profitable Podcast. If you want to help, if you're listening, you can subscribe wherever you listen. You can leave a review wherever you listen. You can share an episode wherever you are. And if you want to learn more about Jeff and his business, you want to list your business, you want to buy a business, you'll be able to contact him and learn more about his information in the show notes at defaultprofitable.com. Jeff, thanks for being a guest for both episodes.
Thank you, Matt. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that
Appreciate
was
asking.
a lot of fun. And for our listeners, we'll be back next week with another episode about starting, running, and growing a business. Until then, keep working, stay profitable.